Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. Good. You can all see me. I can't see all of you right now, and that's all right. It's good to be back. A full year has passed, believe it or not. Time flies when you're having fun. Since our last conference, I'm here with Mr. Jose German, the man, the myth, the legend. How are you doing this morning, Jose? You're muted. You're muted. You're muted, Jose.
Yeah, I'm doing great. A little bit nervous, but you know, this is normal. We have been doing this for 7 years now, so we are here again.
Yes, this is the 7th conference with the Northeast Earth Coalition, and this is our 2nd year doing it as a virtual format. I miss seeing all of you in person, but we'll be back very soon, hopefully. But in the meantime, we are ready to have a good time with everybody this morning at our 7th Acting Locally for a More Sustainable World with Northeast Earth Coalition. We have a very informative and inspiring program as always this year. We'll be hearing from some familiar groups, some new groups, familiar faces, new faces. And I don't want to take up too much time with all the introductions. Jose, if you'd like, you could get started with our first presentation. Update us. Let us know what's been going on the last year.
Thank you.
Looks good.
The logo of the conference?
Yes, looks beautiful.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our 7th Acting Locally for a More Sustainable World Conference. We are very excited to have all of you, and we hope that this event will be a great opportunity to network with other community and leaders and environmentalists in New Jersey and beyond. Today, we have people who will be attending the conference from different places, Pennsylvania, Washington, California. We have people also from Vermont, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. So everywhere. We work at the community level to protect the environment, promote sustainability and food security, and support the work of local environmental activists. That is the mission that we are committed to. We also promote a strong local food system because it contributes to the health of our entire community, and we work to facilitate greater understanding of the social, economic, and environmental impacts on our food choices. We envision a region where people can coexist and prosper in harmony with their environment. To this end, we promote the preservation and restoration of the natural environment. We also promote conservation and integration of renewable, sustainable energy into local communities. And we promote also eco-friendly transportation, including biking and walking, and the development of accessible, reliable, and affordable public transportation. And I'm more than happy and very proud to share with you our best overview. And one of the things that we determined this year, and has been always, is that our best resort is our people. In 2021, we had 623 volunteers who donated more than 7,000 hours with an estimated value of $323,624. And this is remarkable. The Northeast Earth Coalition is a volunteer-driven organization. We serve people in 10 municipalities. Bloomfield, East Orange, Cedar Grove, Clifton, Florham Park, Kinnelon, Montclair, Patterson, Passaic, and Totowa. And our projects in each of these communities is different to another. In Patterson, we have a community garden entirely dedicated to disabled veteran, African-American veterans. In Passaic, we have another community garden, which is the only one entirely dedicated to immigrant women from Mexico and South America. Last year, the volunteers in our community garden and our community food network distributed more than 160,000 pounds of food, equal to 80 tons. We are grateful for our supporters who work 365 days a year to feed people facing food insecurity. We produce more than 8,000 pounds of fresh products, and you can see in the picture fresh, locally grown, organic, and premium quality. We started last year, actually in 2020, October 2020, the Free Little Pantry project, and this project became in 2021 the Community Food Network. Now we have 12 locations of Free Little Pantry providing food 24/7 in 5 townships. And we are still growing. At the end of the season, we celebrate the success of the growing season, and we increase our relationship with our volunteers who have become our friends. In a summary, record number of volunteers, 623, record number of new partnerships for the organization, 23 last year, record numbers of community projects, 5 new environmental projects, record number of community we serve, 10 municipalities, and more visibility. Just in October 2021, we were featured in 7 different newspapers and magazines. And let's see some of the little projects that are making a difference in different communities. Sophia Argemont, she created a vegetable garden, Pollinator Garden in Kinnelon. She has 4 raised beds. The garden will be expanded this year. And all the food that she's producing there is donated to local food pantry. We love to see youth taking the leadership in environmentalism and community activism. And here we have Brian Beard. His Eagle Scout project was creating a pollinator garden in Spring Lake. Very impressive, great work. So we are very proud to be the supporter and the coach of this project. And then moving locally to Montclair in Bush Arden Middle School, Pollinator Garden. This is a new project. It's big, so we are very excited to complete this project in 2022. And here is another environmental project which we love. This is a rain garden, and it was done by Ryan Rauschenberg, and is in the border of the lake, in Spring Lake. He removed invasive plants and covered it with a plastic for over a year, and then he killed all of them without the use of chemical or pesticide or herbicide. And this is what he has been creating since last year. This project will be finalized and signs will be installed, donated by the Northeast Earth Coalition. Our project in Brookdale Park, overlooking spring restoration, continue thriving. We was expanded, and hopefully this year we expand the garden a little bit more. Crane Park Demonstration Garden has been incredibly successful. And according to Google Map, this project, the community garden project, was searched over 100,000 times in 2021. What we do best is bringing people together in partnership, join us, and become part of the coalition. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose, for that recap. It's been a very productive year. Everybody knows that 2020 to present has been somewhat of a trying time, but we see time and time again in history that sometimes trying times is when the most fruitful product is produced. The Northeast Earth Coalition has developed 23 new partnerships and collaborations in 2021, expanding the impact of our programs. surely while some things have been picking back up, it seems like the coalition has never really stopped. So it's really an honor to be here again, 7 years, second year on the virtual format, still excited to be here. Our first group that we will be hearing from, once again, is the Northeast Pollinator Pathways Project. I've been looking forward to this update all year. I believe this is our friend, Luis Washer. Luis, raise your hand for me if you can. We have a lot of attendees here this morning. There she is. We are bringing Luis up.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hi. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see here. And get my thing going here. Oops, hold on, sorry.
It's all good.
There we go. Thank you guys so much. I'm thrilled to be part of today's amazing events and really happy to be partnering with the Northeast Earth Coalition on trying to restore pollinator health and habitat across the region, really. And so I'm going to just have a quick overview of the Pollinator Pathway for those of you that aren't familiar with it, and an update for people that are already working. I took this picture from one of your projects. Jose sent me some pictures of what's going on in New Jersey, and I just love this Brookdale Park shot. So first, I'm going to just start with what is a pollinator pathway. The idea is to create corridors connecting public and private properties that provide pesticide-free native plant habitat for pollinators. So the idea is, if you think of these green blobs here as the protected open space that we set aside for wildlife, the problem with that, and that is really important, land trust land, our parks, but the problem is it's fragmented. That these little blobs that we've created are separated by basically our properties. And so if we start to plant our yards and our parks as safe habitat for wildlife, we can connect these blobs and create wildlife corridors. So that's basically the idea. We want to be this house in the middle here. I love this picture because it just really illustrates the difference. When you plant, perennials, shrubs, trees for wildlife, you can connect to this house that's connecting to this sort of tree farm area behind it, versus these other houses next door that really aren't offering a lot of diversity in plants for birds or butterflies or bees flying over. The story of the Pollinator Pathway, it's been around for about 5 years. It came out of the Hudson to Housatonic Regional Conservation Partnership, which is a bunch of conservation organizations between those two rivers, the Hudson River in New York and the Housatonic in Connecticut. And there was a pilot project of giving native dogwood trees to people in a Connecticut town and then across the line to New York, and to create a corridor. And it was just like really successful. And we also love the idea of crossing these boundaries. We set up our state boundaries, our town boundaries. The birds and butterflies don't see those boundaries. So we took a hold of it in, I work for a watershed association, and in our watershed, we kind of latched onto this idea and thought, maybe this is a good way to connect our 7 watershed towns. We share a river, we share a landscape. Maybe we can use this to reach out to each other and work together better as partners. So we started doing that, and it just took off. It spread. Our neighbors came to us and said, what is this Pollinator Pathway? We want to do this. So it has spread as a grassroots movement of independently town-run projects. So each town looks a little different, their Pollinator Pathway, but we all share a set of resources, and we share ideas, and all of that is housed on the Pollinator Pathway website, which I'm going to talk more about. So today there are 289 towns in about 10 states that are on the Pollinator Pathway. This picture at the top gives you just a little bit of an overview of where it's happening, and this picture at the bottom is kind of the early pathways that we drew on maps. So you can kind of see the idea is to connect to connect the landscapes. So New Jersey is relatively new to the Pollinator Pathway. The Northeast Earth Coalition contacted us, I don't know, a couple years ago, Jose, and we started working together. And so these are the towns that are on the pathway. This is a screenshot from the map, the Google map on the home page of the Pollinator Pathway website. This is a place where people can just put their own gardens on the map. You just fill out a little form, and then you show up as one of these butterflies. So like the Buzz Aldrin Middle School project in Montclair would be the kind of thing that would be one of these butterflies. So if you check out that map, you'll see it's really inspiring to see all the activity happening. I think that the Pollinator Pathway is spreading also because the idea is scalable. This can work in cities, containers on Main Street or in apartment buildings. You can put in more formal gardens at, say, a library or a museum, up to demonstration and even like large-scale restoration sites are on the Pollinator Pathway. So they all work. I think it's also spreading the way it is because we've all seen the bad news, the upsetting bad news. The New York Times Magazine cover, "The Insect Apocalypse is Here," which came basically out of this German study, that really well-respected German study that showed a 76% decline in all flying insects. We're all worried about the monarchs, colony collapse, all of these things, but what we really need is something we can do about it, something each of us can be part of to address those problems. So the first step is to take a look at the threats to pollinators. We talked about loss and fragmentation of habitat, which is really at the top of this list. Pesticides and lawn chemicals, also a huge problem. And invasive plants, landscapes that lack native plants, like this picture in the top right corner, just a loss of plant diversity is at the root of this habitat loss problem. And then climate change. As the climate changes, wildlife needs to move. They need to move north. They need to move to find food, and light pollution. So for our moths and lightning bugs and all of our night flying pollinators. And then I think the Pollinator Pathway is also successful because the message is simple. It's rethink your lawn, plant native plants, and avoid pesticides. So I'm just going to talk about each of those quickly. And I'm going to start with pesticides because hooray for New Jersey. New Jersey just passed a really important landmark bill restricting neonicotinoid pesticides. So the neonics, many of you might be familiar with them. They have been linked to declines in bee populations, especially. In New Jersey, beekeepers have lost more than 40% of their bee colonies nearly every year for the last decade. And that suggests, even though there haven't really been many studies on how these pesticides are affecting native bee populations, we are assuming that the 300 plus native bee species in New Jersey also being affected by these neonics. So the great thing about the Save the Bees bill in New Jersey is that not only does it restrict neonics, so you can't buy them over the counter, which a bunch of other states have, including Connecticut. It also restricts use by licensed pesticide applicators, so lawn care companies. And that's something that only Maine and New Jersey have done. So actually, we have taken the New Jersey bill in Connecticut and we're using it as a base to strengthen our ban that we have. So we are trying to follow in your footsteps. And it's a really great thing that bill passed. It was just signed by Governor Murphy last month into law. So, I mean, the reason is obvious. You don't want to plant for pollinators, to draw pollinators to your yard, and then spray pesticides like my next door neighbor. This is literally next door to me, this thing, because then you're creating an ecological trap. Better not to plant for them than to do that. So again, our website, pollinator-pathway.org, which I can put all that information in the chat at the end about where to reach us, has lots of information about alternatives to chemical fertilizers and pesticides and just tons of information. So the next topic, or the next of our three actions, is to rethink your lawn. So why are lawns causing problems? First of all, there's too much of them, over 50 million acres. You can see in this map, the Northeast, up in the corner, the Northeast is really, we got a lot of green on this map. over 50 million acres of land in the US has lawn on it. They provide little to no habitat, as we kind of talked about. They add fertilizers, toxins. In New Jersey, in the passing of that bill, one of the things we learned is that the heaviest use of neonics was on lawns. That was the top most concentrated use of neonics was on lawns. We know that homeowners typically use 10 times the amount of pesticides and fertilizers per acre on their lawns than farmers do. So they're a problem for that reason. They're also a problem because those fertilizers and things that we put on our lawns wash right into waterways because I love this picture here. Many of you have probably seen it, but I always show it because I love looking at these root systems. You can see on the far left, the turf grass has just this really shallow root system, whereas the other perennials have deep root systems that are in place to capture water that's running off of our driveways, our roofs, our lawns, and to help it percolate through and get cleaned before it reaches waterways. So speaking of water, my other hat that I wear is that I work for a watershed association. So I'm always, water quality and water flow are always top concerns for me. And I mean, one of my jobs is to try to keep more water in our streams in Connecticut. And when I found out from our water company that in the summer in the area where I live, it's 70% of the water that the water company takes out of our waterways, takes out of the groundwater, and creates for us for drinking water. More than 70% of it is used on lawns. And nationally, the number is 9 billion gallons of water a day we use on lawns. So we really need to rethink that. And native plants use a lot less water. They need a lot less water than turf grass does. So again, I'm not going to go through all these ways to rethink your lawn. That everything's available on the website, and I'm trying to race through this talk. Sadly, I have a few minutes, but some pictures of what the difference is also just make just a wonderful difference. And these are some of the projects that Jose was mentioning that are happening in New Jersey that are really important parts of this change that we want to see. And then the third point is to plant native plants. It's important to plant native plants, as most of us have figured out. For me, it was a big light bulb going on when I realized like what the reasoning was. It's that we need the plants that have evolved with our native insects and birds. Those are the plants that they need to survive. So we're planting for wildlife. So we at the Pollinator Pathway, we use Doug Ptolemy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work. A lot of what we're doing is based on his books. He's a professor at the University of Delaware, studying these issues, and he has proposed that we should be working towards having 70 to 80% of our plantings be native, that's the ratio needed to increase native insect populations. And it is so amazing when you start planting these plants that you will have your yard full of these amazing bugs. And I just can't, it's been life-changing for me. So if you're interested in doing this for your town or just doing it in your own yard, lots and lots of plant lists available at pollinator-pathway.org. That's the website. You can download these, you can use them in your town as handouts. This is one that we like, sort of a basic kind of pollinator garden in a basket here. And the orange blocks show the bloom time. So you want to, when you're planting, think about providing pollen and nectar through the season. So you have like a smorgasbord for your pollinators going all from early spring to late fall. We also put a big focus on shrubs. You don't have to clear your yard. You don't have to deal with a meadow. Meadows can be a little challenging to manage for some people. Shrubs are really important, especially the early blooming ones for the queen bumblebees that emerge from the ground first in the season before they've laid their eggs. They need to find pollen and nectar. So you can feel good about that. And trees are hugely important. Sometimes we hear from people, you know, I cut down my trees and I'm going to put in a meadow. And we're like, don't do that. Trees are a crucial larval host for hundreds of species of butterflies and moths. And again, most trees bloom. You know, the early blooming trees are really important, like the red maple. And so again, we have this list here that shows you how to achieve bloom through the seasons. So just in closing up, I wanted to show a picture of our website. So many resources available. One is our habitat sign here to the right, which you can order for yourself. You can also, we get them in bulk, and individual towns can get them at cost and use them as a fundraiser for their own Pollinator Pathway. If you want to find out if your town is already on the pathway, you can go, if you go click on this pathways drop down, you can go to New Jersey or whichever state you're from, and then scroll down to see if your town is there. If it is, they may have a website, a web page. Each town is invited to have their own web page. So Northeast Earth Coalition has created this beautiful page that all the towns that are on the pathway through them link to. So lots of ways to get involved. If you don't see your town there, email us info@pollinatorpathway.org and ask for the form, ask how to start a pathway in your town, and we'll be glad to let you know. And I just ended with some of the pollinator plantings in New Jersey and this amazing map of the Montclair Backyard Habitat Project, which this is exactly what we want. Think you are a butterfly flying over this landscape and you've got all of those way stations to choose from. It just makes me so happy to see that. And to just be working with you guys. The Pollinator Pathway is really about, outreach to existing conservation organizations and individuals who want to be part of this, this project. And, let's talk, let's work together. So any questions? Happy to take questions now. I don't know if we're going to do that or do it by email. But anyway, this is my email, info@norwalkriver.org. You can also email general Pollinator Pathway questions to that, info@pollinator-pathway.org.
Absolutely. Luis, thank you so much for that beautiful presentation. We're going to save Q&A for a little bit. We just have a very packed program. We want to make sure everyone has time.
Okay.
Thank you for that update. We have heard from Douglas Tallamy a couple years ago.
Oh, that's right. I remember that. Yeah.
And he also does amazing work. And we're not just saying that because he shares the same name as me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to the rest of the day.
Absolutely,
Thanks.
Luis. Looking forward to hearing from you again soon. Please be safe.
Thanks a lot.
And now we will be having, I believe, our keynote speaker, Gare, and he's already on with us. How are you this morning, sir?
Good. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's Gare.
Gare. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the correction. So, Gare, feel free to take it away. I really don't want to cut into your time at all.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's really wonderful to tune in. A long time ago when I began working in Washington, D.C., I was legislative director to a senator named Gaylord Nelson. He was the great environmental senator of the time, and he founded Earth Day. And it's an environmental quality that is an environmental motion that began early when I was very young at that time working for him. But it's carried forward to the kind of work that I've been doing and the work that I hear you folks have been doing and see that you've been doing. And there's a kind of trajectory of change following from that, which I'd like to explore with you today as to where I think things like the projects you've been doing locally, and above all locally, working locally to build for the national and for the global change. So that's the trajectory of discussion, how to build a sustainable world, but an equitable world as well, starting locally. The one way to think about it is this. There are a number of projects that begin, as I say, with Gaylord Nelson, the senator, the environmental senator, with local projects, but they begin to expand out, realizing that the economy locally also is critical to whether or not you have a local community that has an environmental consciousness, that has an equitable consciousness, that is racially concerned with equity, that has a different sense of itself locally. So that unless the foundations of the community, and this is the basic foundation of all the work we do here at the Democracy Collaborative, unless the foundations of the community begin where you folks are beginning, with a different vision of what can happen here, you can't change the state, the nation, the world. That's the basic argument. So I see work that's done locally as fundamental and strategic and of the most important power. I take it very, very seriously. So I'm very pleased to be with you. What I also want to suggest to you that there's an emerging trajectory around the world that we've been studying here at the Democracy Collaborative, excuse me, and which takes some of the projects like yours, takes them to different stages and explores different possibilities that move steadily beyond to transformative power. And it's always like that. From the bottom up, the power builds and a vision builds, which becomes state, region, and nation. So that's the development historically that we've been tracking around the world. So one of the things we've seen, and I'm going to talk about cities in Cleveland here, which is a big example, in Ohio, and Preston in England, another city of about 100,000, which give you an example of people beginning with environmental, some with cooperative projects, and then beginning to see that everything is somehow brought together within the perimeters of local community. And can you then move to another stage, walking, as the Chinese used to say, on two legs, doing specific projects now, but also standing back, learning about how people have taken those projects to a different scale, to begin seeing that the goal ultimately, if you want to deal with climate, if you want to do with equity, if you want to deal with democracy and participation, ultimately, there is no way forward unless what we build locally encompasses all of that. So it's an expanding sense of what it takes to make an ecologically and equitable community. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of how that's happened that we've studied here at the Democracy Collaborative, and then work we've done in what we call our Next System project. In Cleveland, there is a community of about 40,000. It's a neighborhood of Cleveland. And if you draw a circle around that community and put up a nonprofit corporation, which tries to look at the environment, ecological change, equity, and even ownership of businesses, cooperatives, for instance, particularly, and worker community cooperatives, and worker joint ventures with nonprofit corporations. And what I'm going to discuss here in Cleveland, and then I'm going to speak about another one in England that are more advanced, but we're seeing this happen all over the country and all over in many parts of the world, as a matter of fact, in Britain, Denmark, and Norway, in some parts of Spain, in the United States particularly. There's an emergence from an environmental consciousness or from an equity consciousness to establishing usually a nonprofit corporation in a community, sometimes including the whole neighborhood of 40,000 or 50,000 or a city of 100,000, that scale and larger. Draw a circle around that if you like, and set up a nonprofit corporation. This is typical in Cleveland, where there's a powerful example. Set up a nonprofit corporation and begin to attach to it, as in many cities are now doing, community-owned businesses that want to be ecologically and equitably advanced. So that nonprofit corporation representing the whole community, but also attached to it as subordinated to it, co-ops, worker-owned companies, as different kinds of economic land trusts, municipal utilities as partners in this. You begin to get a complex that brings together everything within that neighborhood that may or may not take on an environmental stance, that may or may not pollute. You can't pollute yourself if you are a larger community. If the community has a larger stake in the whole, if it pollutes itself. That's one of the parameters of it. If it builds equity for the whole community in joint ventures with cooperatives and economic entities. These kind of somewhat complex, but also growing organic models at the local level are critical to the building of larger power that takes on the environment, equity, democracy, and building from the bottom up for the next, as you were, system. And that's the concept that's beginning to develop in many, many parts of the country now, and in many parts of the world, taking the environmental as well as the equity issues and building a structure that represents all of that and begins advancing step by step, slowly and with participation over time to create new structure as well as new program. Let me say that again. To build structure that can be a continuing structure, a participatory democratic structure that includes many different parts, so that throughout the development, we're not just cleaning up after, but we're building a whole community consciousness with the institutional base building that takes a view of the whole. So that it doesn't, for instance, have one company that pollutes the community, but if the community has a share in the ownership of that company, then it pollutes itself, so that you begin to kind of rationalize the whole structure. So that's very abstract, and you have to forgive a sometime professor being abstract about it, but let me give you some very concrete examples. The one in Cleveland is the one I began to mention. Draw a circle around a neighborhood of 40 or 50,000 people, set up a nonprofit corporation, attach to it joint ventures with community, neighborhood, worker-owned companies, and begin both doing community jobs, income development, and trying to build out some of the money going to the whole neighborhood nonprofit corporation to enrich the environment, to enrich education, to use some of the resources, but also to be fully cognizant of the ecological problems in the community, so that it's not only just what we sometimes call projectism, but this is a structure that tries to build a lasting, building, powerful vision of what this community might build over 30, 40, 50 years, at the same time doing very concrete things on the ground. I love the Chinese expression, the projects need to walk on two legs. One is the immediate concrete projects, like the one that was described just before this talk, absolutely essential, but also simultaneously beginning to build out a vision of what might come next in a larger way. Now, we all know that the larger issues involve climate change, which is global in scale, involve national issues, regional issues. We're a country of over 350 million, 400 million people building that time. How do we begin seeing the larger whole, even as we build out from the community? So I want to take that step now. If you begin to think of what you can do step by step, advancing to different structure, ownership, joint ventures with co-ops, land trusts, municipal utilities, beginning to bring that in rather than seeing them as separate, as many communities are doing. And as I say, if you go to our website that you have after this talk, there are many, many examples around this country and around the world. Taking the next step to the community, you begin to get a sense of what might be built in many communities. And that's a large step, because that notion of creating in different communities around the country, and now in many parts of the world that we've been working with, of holistic understandings of these joint ventures that start with ecological principles, democratization, localism, but are not limited. They recognize they live in a larger system, but beginning to take that quite seriously and thinking it through. It all sounds a bit complicated, but if you hold it that way, that what are we doing here? What would happen if many, 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 many communities did the same? And secondly, how would we link the many communities doing the same so that they didn't compete, but were stabilizing and working in a cooperative way together? That, I speak as a part-time academic, a part-time political activist, and part-time someone who's worked at high levels of the US government, in the House and Senate, and elsewhere in the government. If you look at those many, many, many communities as the foundations ultimately of the political economy, an economy and a political system are only built on many, 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 many communities. So this is what we're thinking about as systemic or system-wide change over time, as we move deeper and deeper into the ecological, the environmental, and the economic crisis. What happens if we build in many, many communities, starting as you folks have done, but then building on examples elsewhere that I've discussed, so that the foundations, the ground zero of each community takes on this new shape of including different elements and including changes in income and wealth distribution by setting up some way to hold things in common. Land trust being a very conventional example, public utilities, and other neighborhood corporations. all holding something in common, building the basis of a different direction. Now, I stand back from this, and just to give you an example, the feminist movement took 30, 40, 50 years of development to reach power. I worked for Gaylord Nelson. The environmental movement and Earth Day took many, many, many decades to reach any significant power, but it always began locally. The same is true with the labor movement. So I take what you folks are doing extremely seriously. I don't see it only as local projects. I see it as a historian and as a political economist, and how might it unfold as it's happening in many communities around the country and around the world, to take on larger pieces of the local economy, working also with small business and co-ops, but also collective structures, nonprofit corporations, as I've mentioned, that may hold larger businesses. And as the term is internalizing externalities. Let me unpack that academic term. If you draw a circle around a neighborhood or community, any one company may have an advantage by polluting because it cuts costs. But if there's a joint venture with the neighborhood corporation or a nonprofit or the municipality, if it cuts costs by polluting, it pollutes itself. So the larger notion of community structures that hold and own, as in Youngstown, Ohio, as in Cleveland, as in Preston, many cities that we've worked with, begin to see that if they pollute, the structure is inherently containing the problem, so that we pollute yourself and it becomes irrational rather than to dump costs onto the rest of the community. So we're seeing that for larger industries, small businesses, cooperatives, worker-owned companies, slightly larger nonprofit corporations, Cleveland and Preston being the big examples right now, having subordinated joint ventures with co-ops, and beginning to build out not just policy, not just projects, this is the next stage, but structures that begin to reflect the needs of the whole community economically and ecologically. I hope that's not too complex in a short conversation, but it is an emergent development around the country and around the world. And if you go to the websites of that you can get from the folks who are running the conference, our websites and others, you begin to see how many different places around the country and around the world are beginning to evolve from projects, local projects, to these structures that take on an inherent capacity to balance internally the needs of environment, equity, ecological challenges, and democratic control in very, very, very complex, but very, very kind of down-home, ordinary experiences in local communities. So let me take that as the foundational direction, beginning where you folks have gone, where we've begun in our work. The next stage beyond that, and forgive me, I'm a historian as a political economist, but I'm very interested in how do you get this kind of attitude and experience become a common experience, a national experience, part of the movement. Well, as a historian as well as a political economist, big time change nationally always begins locally, always. What happens locally is the foundation of anything that happens nationally. So what you folks are doing down home locally, in my view, is the most important work that goes on in a democracy. Because upon the foundation stones that are laid locally, structure, environmental consciousness, new forms of ownership, if we build that way, as many places are around the country and around the world, you're laying down the groundwork for a larger regional and state and ultimately system-wide consciousness, but change and structure, institutional structure. And again, the model that I think is so simple to understand is the private company, or even a private worker-owned company operating in a market, unfortunately has a tremendous pressure to cut costs, because that's the way the market works. And that often means environmental destruction because it costs money to do environmentally sound things. So under the pressure, the market just generates these pressures. A community or neighborhood owned structure can decide to pollute, but if it pollutes itself. So setting up structures at some level that begin to suggest ways we economists say internalizing the externalities. so that the costs are contained within the community structure itself. That's a foundational model to the extent we can begin to do this. And as I say, there are many examples. If you go to our website, which the people running the conference today can give you some website links, how this is happening in different parts of the world, moving from local projects to slightly larger, to containing in Cleveland and Preston being the most advanced, Preston, England, and Cleveland, Ohio, the most advanced structures, but many, many like them around the world, laying down groundwork that offers a vision of what might happen in the region, in the Tennessee Valley area, perhaps. That's another example, or upper Northwest, or in the New England, or in your own region. How we might begin to think and open our minds wide to the possibility that what we are doing locally is not only environmentally important, but also beginning to develop structures and institutions that project an idea of what might come next. This all sounds quite abstract, but as I say, if you look back in history, it always begins locally. This kind of change, models that develop and then begin to lay foundations for how we begin to reshape the larger system, if you like. So I take that very seriously. I don't think it put another way, it never begins any place but locally. What is exciting is the explosion of new projects and advances that begin with these principles, but are developing not only politics, not only activism, not only experiments locally, not only good environmental projects, but also structures that inherently internalize externalities and build models locally for democratic development and ecological development and equitable development that lay groundwork for longer term change. Now, I'm from Wisconsin, and I was brought up long ago in the time of Joe McCarthy. Nothing moved politically in Wisconsin. Everything was stopped dead cold because Joe McCarthy was antagonistic to virtually everything. And so if you had looked at the possibilities of national change in that time in Wisconsin in the late 1950s, nothing was possible. But of course, what happened next was the 60s exploded and all the movements of the 1960s exploded. And what did they build upon? They always built upon something that had been developed locally in terms of activism or projects or institutional development. So I take very seriously that model historically is always the same. You don't find sit-ins in the South in civil rights. The movements that began in feminist movements, the labor movement. The local projects and the local development is critical to the larger perspective, almost without exception as a rule in history. So there's a kind of a bottom line conclusion to this very short talk with you folks that are doing wonderful work that I've, so far as I can tell from what I've read and what I've been talked to about. The bottom line about it is the way forward is, I like to think about it in this old Chinese expression, all efforts going forward need somehow to walk on two legs. What does that mean? It means you've got to take care of business locally on local projects. But always there's another need to consider how they might be expanded to models that might be applicable to a larger system-wide change that deals with environment, equity, democracy, ecological equality, ecological change, economic equality, always thinking both locally and beyond to systemic design and systemic possibilities. That's very abstract, but it need not be abstract, because what you do in a new model locally, if it begins to encompass a larger vision, starting with the beginning step-by-step projects that we all have, but also seeing how would we expand to take a larger sense of where this might take us locally, in this community, what municipal resources can be brought to bear, what state resources might be brought to bear, how might public universities, and this is another thing that happened, stabilize jobs, begin to provide contracts to cooperatives and others to stabilize ecologically sane development. How might we begin to build, that's called a planning system, when you begin to use hospitals and universities and public money to stabilize and build and support the nurturement of new projects of the kind I'm discussing, the kind that you're building. That's a model of using the higher level structures, or if you like, the Tennessee Valley Authority as a whole region, or public money in the government nationally, using that both to stabilize jobs and to do it ecologically, but in ways that build structure locally, institutional, cooperative, nonprofit, local and community structures that reflect these values: equity, ecological sustainability, economic sustainability, and a whole different vision of what a whole community might be like if it began to reflect these in its institutional development. So let me stand back from this all too complicated subject for a short talk like this, but I take so seriously what you folks are doing, is to say that, how do you begin to do this? It all sounds very complex. What we've found is kind of I like this old Chinese expression: anything serious walks on two legs. One, doing concretely what you're doing now. That's one leg. And the other, stepping back, getting some friends together, getting some beer and some pizza, begin reading about what's being done around the country, around the world. You could go to our website, and that material, I think, is available to you from the organizers of this conference. See what other people are doing in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, that start with local projects, but also kind of push ourselves to think, supposing we were to take a next step here locally that had the presumption, if I may say, to say we are going to build models that advance what could be done in the whole country as a foundational basis for transformation. And I think you'll find that around the country, there are many pieces and puzzles. A lot of folks beginning to do that. Public banks are beginning to develop in many parts of the world, in many parts of the United States. Use of public purchasing power of universities and hospitals are being used to help support these new kinds of community development, community ownership strategies that are ecologically sound, using public funds in support of democratizing ownership, generating a whole foundation. In one sense, this sounds quite dramatic, presumptuous, radical, but in another sense, it's very, very conventional. That's how the feminist movement started. As I said before, that's the history of the civil rights movement. That's the history of the labor movement. That's the history of the ecological movement. Virtually every development begins locally and then begins to offer a direction that manifests or has the potential of manifesting beyond. So what I would suggest is, how does one actually do this? How does one do it? The most important two things are one, getting your hands really good and dirty with local projects and working hard and sweat on the kind of things that people are really doing. But there's a second piece, and it's kind of we learned this in the 1960s and 70s from the feminist movement, particularly. How do you make larger change happen that takes local projects, but then begins to think, no, we have responsibility for the whole as well. You can't do anything without doing it locally, but you must go national. The way you do it, the feminist movement taught us, is quite simple. You begin, gather together half a dozen friends, you get some pizza and some beer or whatever else you like to drink. You begin reading about what is happening beyond the local and beyond the environmental and beyond what is now taken for granted. What might we do? What is being done? What are other people doing? You could go to our websites, which we can easily provide you, and the folks who are managing this conference can provide some of the website information on what is happening around this country and around the world that takes the next step from local projects to regional and national long-term strategy. That larger, we all know the environmental and climate change issues can't be dealt with in any one community locally. They have to be local, but there also has to be regional and national work too. The same with the economy. How do we begin building out, rebuilding a whole different way of thinking about the future, but also very practically, step by step, walking on two legs. Nothing moves without the local, but also nothing can be dealt with in the larger sense without the national. What's very exciting about this time is that some of the bigger universities and hospitals have begun to be, because local activists demand it, focusing their economic resources on how to rebuild local economies by purchasing power, investing power, cooperatives, nonprofit corporations that take the environment seriously, beginning to build models locally that reach out to these larger visions. So my hat's off to what you folks have been doing. and I appreciate very much being asked to participate in this conference. But I also would suggest that you guys are really in position to offer the possibility of opening a whole direction of great empowerment that takes that larger next step, difficult as it may seem, but building on the wonderful groundwork and foundations that I understand you've already developed. So thank you very much for having me, and I wish you the best for your conference. It's a very exciting to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gare, for a very informative presentation. And I understand that you've been in this arena for quite some time. Is that right? Do you have a year number that you could share with us?
Hey, which number?
A year number, how long you've been doing this?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I've been doing it at least 50 years now.
50 years.
For openers.
Yeah, 50 years of thinking globally and acting locally. And as you know, that's what this conference has really been centered around for a very long time. You know, and that is what we always try to purport. You've also published quite a few books, is that correct? How many in total?
I think it's about a dozen now, closing in on a dozen. I'm just about finished with another one, which is, well, I have finished it. I'm just beginning to fine tune the last bit of it.
What's that one going to be about? Are you allowed to give us a little teaser, or do you not?
No, what it does is it looks at how other movements begin locally and develop to regional and state and national power over time, women's movement, civil rights movement, labor movement, but also the movements of the kind of work that is being discussed in this conference, but seeing it not just locally, but how it becomes transformative systemically, and then looking at all the most advanced projects that we found in this country and around the world to give people an idea of what's being done elsewhere. The most advanced one in the United States is in Cleveland. The most advanced in Great Britain is in a city called Preston, but they'll take the next step to institutionalizing these developments. And they suggest what folks at home, I'm from Racine, Wisconsin, that's my hometown, but people who in Racine or in Cleveland or in Preston develop models that also projected the way forward for a larger system. And there's just an exciting amount of this going on that the press doesn't cover much, but is happening worldwide and actually, and in this country and in Britain as leadership models.
Yeah, and building on your topic again of how when we start these different local movements, they do spread. The NEEC, as everybody knows, really the mothership was in Montclair for a long time. But for the last 7 years, we have presence now in 10 different townships, and it's growing. It's almost like the Pollinator Pathway idea that we just heard about also. You have a good idea that is to scale, that is feasible, realistic goals, and that model can spread to neighboring communities, and that's where we get the widespread macro change that we're looking for.
Absolutely. I always suggest that the way forward is to read about some of these things that are happening in other communities, and you can go to our website. I'm sure you can provide material on that. Get some friends together, get some pizza and beer, ask what could we do locally that advances to the presumption that we can change the system. The presumption that we can change the system. The great model is the feminist movement, that we can change things, but it begins by looking at what's being done around the world that is quite practical, very practical, but also offers that larger leverage on a period of time, over time, that is quite reasonable if you think in terms of decades as well. Where could this project lead? So that's the exciting perspective that I see developing in many parts of the country and elsewhere around the world, the people we work with.
Absolutely. Now, we definitely still have some time in your time slot, and we definitely want to accept some questions from our friends and neighbors here at the 2022 conference. So we have a couple options since we have some time. The first question that I'm going to relay to you, Gare, is because I'm seeing in the Q&A here, a few people are asking for some more details about the Cleveland project. What exactly is going on, when it begun, things like that when it began. Sorry.
Well, the Cleveland, I'll give you the answer in broad sweep. The Cleveland project really began in its conception years earlier in Youngstown. There was a major shutdown of a big steel factory in the late 70s. And that the 5,000 people lost their jobs. And it was devastating to the city of Youngstown. But the Catholic Church there and the workers and neighborhood groups began saying, well, this is devastating to our community. Can't we do something about it? And they got together and they began talking about it and thinking about what could we really do. It's a giant steel mill. That's the heart of this community. Why couldn't we set up a community / worker-owned company that would be ecologically serious, democratically controlled, and owned by the community and the workers? It was sponsored. The Catholic Church and the several other church leaders got involved. The state of Ohio got involved. The Carter administration got involved, and they began building a community worker-owned structure that would benefit everyone, but jointly with the workers. It was a complex structure and had ecological vision at the heart of it. So that came out of, and I always say the best way to do it is get some pizza and some beer and sit down and talk about your friends. What if they've done it elsewhere? We could do it here. That's the ground, and that's the key. This kind of thing is being done elsewhere. It could be done here in my hometown of Racine, Wisconsin, or your hometown. And then looking at that model of taking not only projects, nothing begins without projects, they are the ground, but also looking to local systemic design, ownership, nonprofit structures that seem a little bit more complex and seem impossible. But if somebody else is doing it in another community and they're starting in the same place we're starting, why couldn't we do that? And why couldn't we do better than they did? It is possible to develop walk on two legs projects where you do what you can do, but also think beyond that. So that's the evolving model we see in different parts of the country. Another piece of this, there were no public banks. Now there are a number of public banks, state, city banks that are owned by the public and used to finance these kinds of broader projects that are ecologically sound and democratically controlled. That didn't come out of nowhere. That came out of people working the way folks are working in the project you're talking about, but had a slightly larger vision and began thinking, well, we could go to a larger scale. And by the way, if we can do it here and they're doing it in other countries, maybe we're talking about something that builds to more power. So it's in some sense, it's very conventional. It's very much the way historical change occurs all the time, but people rarely step back and ask themselves, not only this project, but we together, having learned how to do this project, perhaps could take a larger vision of where all this could go. That's what we're seeing happening and beginning to say, this is ultimately system changing and seeing it self-consciously. And that's the point. If I had anything to say, my wife is a psychotherapist. And so now we're going to reflect on my wife's teaching. The hardest part is to look in the mirror and say, am I up to changing the system or a larger sense, not just projects, not just projectism, to coin a phrase, but no, looking at this work as the foundation stone of a larger trajectory, self-consciously thinking that way. And then looking at all the models, you can go to our website and many other websites. I'm sure you can give those links to folks about what's actually happening in different parts of the United States. Public banks are being established, state-owned banks, land trusts, neighborhood-owned land, public utilities, worker joint cooperatives, complex structure. This stuff is happening all over the country with very little press attention and all over the world, laying the foundation stones for larger change beyond. And when you begin to think that way, is throwing 2 or 3 decades on the table from where you're going, all of a sudden, very practical things begin to look like this is how you change larger structures. And it's very ordinary in history. It's the way it's always done. When it always begins with exactly the kind of things you folks are doing, but also the standing back and thinking broadly what could be done here that has leverage on the future. A friend of mine always uses that language. can this project not only do something now, but have leverage on the future? And I think that's what's really exciting about what I see you folks are doing, and some of the things that can be added in from around the country and around the world.
Absolutely. And I really like what you, the quote that you just shared with us. And, you know, we all know the definition of sustainability, right? Being able to do something now without affecting the ability for others way down the line to do the same thing. But what you're suggesting, and some of the different projects that the NEEC takes up and a bunch of the different organizations that we hear from, is doing more than that, giving leverage on the future, not just making sure that people have the same ability as us down the line, but making sure that they have even more, exceeding, transcending the status quo. It's a very important idea. Another question that was posed to you, sir, from our good friend Greg Payson. How you doing, Greg? Good to hear from you this year. He had a question about building outside the state market in this time in history. How are things different now than they were different in the 1950s and 60s? I know you probably have a very collegiate answer to that, but my answer would probably just be one word, and that's Facebook. Social media. Right? How are things different? No, I'm kidding. Well,
no, that's very important.
Say to that?
Because it's what you just said is very important, because it's very much easier now than it was way back in 100 years, in the ancient time of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, ancient history. You can see things and talk to people instantly in, say, Cleveland. If you want to go to Cleveland, you can talk to those folks right now and see them and find out what they're doing. You can do that in Preston, England. So these are the two most advanced models that we know about. And you can find out what the problems they had, how they put together large-scale joint community, worker-owned, environmentally sustainable, community benefiting economic development. They get the universities to play a big role. This is universities and hospitals have a lot of public money. And if you reach to them, many people have found they can be leveraged and indeed have a requirement to do some things for the community. And all of a sudden they become sources of money and purchasing power to build out structures that actually benefit the environment, benefit the community. So people are learning a lot of things that can be done, starting where it always starts, locally with local projects, but reaching into public sources of money that are already there that can benefit the community in ways that are internally, ecologically sustainable, that they're systemically, instead of if you're a local project standing like your local business, it's in your interest to cut costs and often to pollute the community if that's the result. You don't like to do it, but the competition is cutting costs environmentally and can beat you in the market, you may be forced to. A community that jointly owns some of the companies and cooperatives pollutes itself if it does that. So the structure internalizes the externalities. The structure makes you think about this whole community as a whole, as well as the individual nonprofit and profit-making smaller companies as well. So these structures are beginning to show the principles involved in a different way of thinking about the longer term for the whole community. And as I say, this used to be kind of pie in the sky, but now we're seeing many, many places where this is actually being done. So you can learn how to do it if you just go to our website or other websites, and you'll see folks that are doing this around the country and around the world.
Absolutely. And actually, just for everyone's information, in the Q&A portion of our Zoom meeting, I just answered a few questions with the website that Gare is referencing. So if you'd like to check that out, please click on the link. I have another question from Jane. She's asking if you could elaborate a little more on the Preston, UK community of projects. What's going on across the pond, if you will?
This is very interesting. There's a Matthew Brown, who's a local guy in Preston, who got very excited about some of the things that were done in Cleveland. So here's how it works: transatlantic. He learned about the community and worker-owned companies in Cleveland that are ecologically developed and community participation. And he said, well, why can't we do it here in the city of Preston? Preston is a decaying city of about 80,000 in the Midlands of Great Britain. And he said, if they can do it there, why can't we do it here? And that's just what they've done. They began building a model out in Preston. They got the Labor Party involved ultimately in changing the Labor Party platform locally and then nationally. And they're beginning to build worker cooperatives and community-owned companies and ecological projects, all as a complex, saying we must think about the whole. We can't just build businesses who have businesses are good because they provide jobs and income and wealth, but if they're set up in a way that it's in their advantage to cut costs by polluting, well, then the whole community doesn't benefit. It gets polluted. So how do we structure things institutionally that the community of the neighborhood is part of the ownership so that it pollutes itself and doesn't want to do that? Set up the incentive structure structurally so that there is no incentive to pollute yourself. So if you go to our website or other places, you'll see this model, somewhat complex for larger structures. Subordinated to it, there's lots of freestanding co-ops and small business, of course, but trying to find ways structurally to be both democratic and, as we economists say, internalize externalities. If you pollute yourself. So there's no incentive to doing it. And that's what Preston has been doing.
Absolutely. Great recap. Thank you for that. We have another very interesting question, which I'm curious also about myself. And Michelle, I see your hand. We'll get to you after this one question. If anyone would like to speak their question, we have that ability also. I can give you the ability to speak if you're comfortable speaking to our keynote speaker, and in front of everyone else also, if you're comfortable. Our friend Anne is asking for you to elaborate on state banks and how that works. She says that she's curious because New Jersey might be open to that model. And I'm very curious about that also. What exactly is the state banking system?
Well, a state banking system is it's not very fancy. It's kind of straightforward and simple. There are within the Department of Agriculture nationally, there are, I think the last time I saw 30 or 40 entities that finance projects in agriculture. What they are is essentially banks. There is a co-op bank, a national co-op bank, and there is the Bank of North Dakota. They are state-owned public banks that are supported by business, small businesses, cooperatives, and so forth. But they have a kind of a community function as well as just a private business function. I think the Bank of North Dakota is the one that's most interesting because it's been there 100 years, and they're supported by the local business, local cooperatives, the public support. It finances the kinds of projects that we're talking about here that are beginning to pop up all over the country and around the world. So that's another element in this. There are a number of people who've been writing about this, and if you go to our website, you'll find lots of discussion about some of the work. A woman named Ellen Brown is a leading figure on public banking around the country and around the world, but the Bank of North Dakota is the one to look to first. It's 100 years old, and it shows the way.
Was North Dakota the first state bank system to be established? Is that what you're saying?
It's the first and most longstanding. It's been there and operating with great success and great political support for 100 years.
Interesting. And let me ask you this. I just want to build on that question because sometimes I know I'm the MC, but sometimes I can't help but asking some questions because I get so interested in the topics that we're learning about. Do you think that maybe these banks are sustainably successful because they almost seem to have a smaller scale than the large dynamic banks that we all are familiar with?
Well, I wear two hats. Once I'm a political economist, but I'm a historian. Nothing interesting begins any place but small.
Good answer.
So that's the way it works. So if they begin building out and they're good, if they're doing good work and the projects they're supporting are both good and popular, then they find long-term support. Now, North Dakota and South Dakota are not radical states, but there they are with these public banks as kind of conventional, supported by small business, cooperatives, farmers, et cetera, and models of what is eminently practical that can be done anywhere. If people say, well, if they could do it there, why couldn't we do it here? and seeing themselves as citizens that way.
When you said North Dakota, I was like, if North Dakota could do it, how come New Jersey can't do it? You know, that's
Exactly.
what was going through my head when you said
Well,
that.
it's exactly, that's
That's
what's exciting. That's what's exciting about all the projects. If you go to our websites, and you can put them up on the screen, there's so much on the ground now that's not covered by the normal press that's happening all over the country, around in many parts of the world, but in all over the country, that if somebody else can do it in some other state, why can't we do it here? That model. And I think that is what's exciting about this time. In the last 30 or 40 years, not very well covered by the press. But go to our websites and you'll see just this stuff is popping up everywhere. Practically, it's not abstract. It's hands-on, real things, not kind of airy-fairy rhetoric.
Yeah, reality. That's the most important thing. Tangible results. I'm sure we could have a whole day conference on pontificating why the press does not cover such productive and progressive things. We don't want to open up that can of worms this morning. I see Michelle here with her hand up. Michelle, I'm gonna allow you to talk. You have the ability to dictate your question to all of us. We are excited to hear from you. If you'd like to type your question in the Q&A, I would be happy to relay it to our friend Gare also, but you have the floor. Feel free to unmute whenever you're ready. I know sometimes Zoom is not the fastest, no pun intended, when it comes to getting people on. Michelle, please unmute whenever you're ready. We'll give Michelle just a minute. Give her 1 minute. Gare, while we wait for Michelle, is there a convenient spot for people to pick up your publications?
If you go to the Democracy Collaborative website, it's www.democracy collaborative. There's all sorts, and the Next System project within that. But it's easy. It's a very good website. You can follow it. But the Democracy Collaborative does all sorts of things on these kinds of projects. And then there's a part of its structure is called the Next System Project. It's all the kind of debate back and forth about what's happening in this country and around the world, taking local projects to what happens if we did it throughout the country. Well, we'd have changed the system. It's not magical. It's just, as a friend of mine says, it's just work.
I want to make a quick point real quick, just checking in with our conference schedule. Shortly after this, in about 10 minutes, we're going to start our first virtual tabling section. We have 4 different organizations that we're going to hear from. Those 4 different organizations, you should know who you are. Please raise your hand whenever you get a minute, just so I could find you quickly in the participant list. I'll promote you to panelists as we close up our Q&A with Gare. Gare, I don't see any other questions right now from the public, so I have a quick, somewhat less tense question for you. I also read that you have been a guest on numerous different network TV and cable programs. What was the most exciting for you when you were participating in those? What was the most memorable, if you have an experience that you could share with us from that? I saw that you were on Larry King Live, and yes. I thought that was pretty interesting. Mr. King, you know, lots of interesting features on his program.
Well, you know, part of this is part of the work I do is on history of nuclear weapons, and I've written several books about the Hiroshima and the bombing of Hiroshima, and what was one of the things that the most interesting thing, I was at some conservative program, I can't remember which one it was, one of the national conservative television programs, had me on talking about this work. And they began putting down the criticism of use of nuclear weapons. There's a whole debate about Hiroshima. And I said, well, you know, I'm just arguing the position that was argued by General Eisenhower, General MacArthur, Admiral Leahy, all the top military figures of World War II, thought that the use of the atomic bomb was a terrible, terrible mistake because it was used on civilian centers. And these are all very, very conservative generals and admirals. And this very, very right-wing guy who was interviewing me just kept backing up because all of his heroes, these military admirals, who were very thoughtful people. I'm on the progressive side, but I've come to respect really good, solid thinking, conservative thought, and these guys in particular. It was kind of an interesting moment of discussion about the mistake you make if you don't honor these great traditions, the great conservative as well as liberal and radical traditions, and honor them all, because there are really good people involved in all of them if you can talk about practical things or real things together. And that was one experience I had in talking about the Hiroshima issue, and how the generals and admirals later on came on and said it was terrible to bomb civilian targets, women and children mainly, because the young guys were off to war.
Absolutely. Interesting stuff. And you were mentioning the book that you have finished very recently. When do you expect for that to hit shelves? When do you think we could get a copy?
We're just literally just putting the fine tuning the last little bits on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you know, books are kind of like babies. They take 8 to 9 months once you put them to bed. And but it's not a great time to publish it. I think what I'd like to do is publish it early next year. Okay. Yeah, it could probably come out in the fall, but I think that's pushing it a little too hard and you get caught up in the Christmas. But this early part of next year, I think is the time to do it.
Nice. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions right now, my good friend Gare. Do you have any kind of parting sentiments, ideas, insights, inspirations that you might be able to share with our audience on this beautiful Saturday morning?
Well, let me just return again to this this paradigm of how change happens, because folks often, you know, as I say, I'm from Racine, Wisconsin, a city of about 80,000. But how do you make change? How do you change the system? Most people don't really. They look in the mirror in the morning. They don't really think about that. They think about local projects necessarily, correctly. But the way you get into larger change historically is, and I want to repeat this, you gather some friends together, half a dozen, get some pizza and some beer, and you say, if they could do it elsewhere, and if it's been done in history many, many times, the women's movement, the environmental movement, the civil rights movement, the labor movement, et cetera, they all start the same way. What could we do here with the presumption that we could change the larger country? What? Well, how else does it ever happen? It's always some folks locally who say, we're doing something important here, and if we did it here, it could be replicated. And if we did it well, we could help get other folks to do it well. And we could take a larger sense, some of the things I talked about that are taking it to the community level and building structure, nonprofit and other structure. If we could do that, other people could do that. So having that larger embrace of how terribly important local work is, but equally important to have a self-conscious idea that this can be the foundation for other communities as well. That's the only way it ever works. But there is a need to be self-conscious about it. And so, as I always say, the best way to start is with some pizza and some beer and talk about what's doing and what could we do here that would take it on larger. You guys have a fantastic start from everything I've read and what you've been doing so far. I just want to congratulate you and say, let's move it out as a basis for the next big step forward in larger leveraging of other things as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming, Gare. Thank you for taking a break from the good fight to join us this Saturday. And you know, like they always say, no great memory ever started with a glass of milk.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gare. We appreciated your wonderful presentation and advice. And we are following exactly what you are doing, expanding, getting out of Montclair. We are now in 10 municipalities and we are going out of the state soon. So that is the news that you will be hearing from us when we are in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and New York City.
Wonderful,
working
thank
on
you.
Promoting the agenda. Thank you.
We're spreading. Thank you, Gar. I know that you can't hear it right now, but everyone's in front of their computers. Clap.
Thank you.
All
you.
right. So, Gar, thank you again, sir. That was an amazing talk and presentation, really thought-provoking answers. That's one of the most important things about this conference every year. The dialogue is extremely productive, extremely important. So now we're going to be doing our virtual tabling. Each group is going to have about 5 minutes to share with us what they've been doing, some updates. Again, we love hearing from our different partnering organizations, hearing what they've done in the past year. 365 days, it's a lot of days to do good stuff. First up, we're going to be hearing from 350 NJ, our good friend Ted Glick. Hello, Ted. Good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Yes. So it's actually, the group is 350 New Jersey, Rockland. We work with people in Rockland County, New York. That's the way this organization developed a number of years ago. Quickly, for people who might not be aware or don't remember what 350 refers to, it refers to what the scientists have determined is the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that would allow for a stable climate. For millions of years, CO2 in the atmosphere has been somewhere around 300 parts per million. And it's now up to 415 parts per million. And it's speeding up. The rate of increase is speeding up. 350 is what we have to get back to. So that's what our name references. It just kind of says in and of itself how serious our situation is when it comes to the climate crisis, the climate emergency we're in. As far as what we've been doing over the last year, really for the last several years, there have been two major focuses of our work. One of them in both New York and in New Jersey. We've been working on the issue of divesting from fossil fuels. I just want to kind of frame this. We see that the most essential, or one of the most essential tasks in solving this deep climate hole that we're in, getting out of it, is to weaken the power of the fossil fuel industry and to shift away from fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. So the divestment movement, which has been around now for about 10 years, is definitely having an impact in terms of actually taking money away from the fossil fuel industry and very much driving a shift away from investment in fossil fuels to renewable energy. As an example, it came out a few months ago that there's about 1,500 institutions worldwide controlling about $40 trillion in assets that have committed to full or partial divestment from coal, gas, and oil. So this is a growing movement, and we're doing our part in New York and in New Jersey to help it develop. In New York, things are definitely pretty advanced in terms of this work for the whole country. There was divestment announced by the controller, Tom DiNapoli, at the end of 2020, December of 2020. He announced that the $226 billion pension fund, state pension fund, was going to start moving out of the fossil fuel industry. And just as an example of what's happened, just a few days ago, literally on February 9th, it was announced that $238 million of that fund was being divested from 21 shale oil and shale gas companies because they were not moving the way they needed to in terms of the shift that's necessary. So through our Rockland members, we played an active role in that ongoing campaign to get New York to divest. Here in New Jersey, we're not as far along, but we're making some progress. As of about a year ago, we had recruited 50 members of the state Senate and the Assembly to co-sponsor legislation in both the Senate and the Assembly calling for divestment. That work led to us starting to meet regularly with the State Investment Council, which oversees the New Jersey Pension Fund, and also now with the Division of Investment, which actually makes the decisions about where investments are made. And they are moving in a similar direction as New York State. They are not as far along, but they are moving in that direction. They're starting to look at their portfolio from the standpoint of where can we take action to make this shift. So we're making progress. We definitely need people to continue keeping up the pressure, particularly in New Jersey. So please be in touch with us. I'll give you the coordinates there in just a minute or two. The other major thing we're doing is we're working with many groups around the state of New Jersey and to some extent in New York, but mainly New Jersey, to prevent the building out of new fossil fuel infrastructure. There's an organization, a coalition of over 100 groups, Empower New Jersey, that has been calling for a moratorium on any new fossil fuel infrastructure for about 3.5 years. We've been working that. We haven't gotten it yet from the governor, but what we have done successfully, very much grounded in local work, to emphasize that point that Gare spoke about. There have been 3 major projects that have been defeated: the Northeast Supply Enhancement, the North Bergen Meadowlands Power Plant, and the Pennies Pipeline. Those are all dead as a result of a lot of good, hard local organizing, grassroots organizing, and support statewide. And there are a number of others, though, that are still out there that we're working on. A frack gas plant in Newark that's being attempted, expansion of the Tennessee gas pipeline across northern New Jersey, New Jersey Transit wanting to maybe put in a frack gas plant when all the power goes down, and then a major fight in southern New Jersey that with a export terminal at Gibbstown, New Jersey. We're trying to prevent all of those plus some others. So just 2 other quick things. We also, over the last year or so, have begun to focus much more on the issues of environmental justice and the necessity of anti-racism in our work. And we've done that through both forums that we've organized, Zoom events, but also actual practical work. And finally, please sign up to hear from us regularly. We send out emails every couple of weeks or so with some of the latest major actions and campaigns. You can do that by going to 350nj.org, and you can sign up there. So thank you very much.
Ted, always a pleasure. This is very important stuff. One more time, just so we have everyone's attention, what is that website?
It's 350nj.org.
You heard the man, everybody. Go get the update, follow along. This is indeed the future. There just is not enough gas to go around, Ted. So that was 350NJ. Next up, we are hearing from Pay Up the Polluters. Sounds right up my
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello. Good to hear from.
Yours.
Oh, hi. Hi, everybody. My name's Lauren O'Brien from the Pay Up Climate Polluters New Jersey campaign. But Sir Jose has let me know it would be time for a bathroom break. So he would love for everyone to take just 2 minutes to take care of that. And then I'll come back and announce who else we're going to be hearing from after me and do my quick 5 minutes. So I'll see you in 2 minutes. Okay, we're back. Hello. So Lauren O'Brien, Pay Up Climate Polluters New Jersey. Great to see a lot of you here, and thank you for this opportunity. Hey Ted, great presentation. 350 is a good national partner of ours. So I represent a campaign from the Center for Climate Integrity, and you can read, there it is, but we hold oil and gas companies legally accountable for their role in climate change and make them, well, we hope to make them pay the costs of all the projects that we are doing to combat climate change, especially here in New Jersey. So we're national, nonpartisan, and nonprofits. And we educate folks on the history of their knowledge and deception about their product's role in global warming and what kinds of very dangerous and costly impacts that has created throughout the world. We specifically work in the United States, and I run the statewide program in New Jersey. We are supported, as you can see, by a lot of wonderful people. We have over 125 leaders in our elected official program across the country and growing, and New Jersey represents 10% of that. And we have climate-like accountability lawsuits from local, county, and state entities, which I'll talk about in a minute. There is a federal investigation that kicked off at the end of October by the House Oversight Committee for this. And we're talking about very similar to big tobacco. They knew, they lied, they damaged, and they should pay. And so, you know, we are supported as well with local, county, and state resolutions throughout the state of New Jersey and a nonprofit coalition of 85 organizations. We always are looking to grow this. We always do grow, luckily, because it takes a lot of us to make this happen. And I will give you a sign up link at the end of this chat so that you can sign up for more information. But we are talking about lawsuits specifically. And there's a whole bunch of information that we can give you on that with a longer presentation. But these are 26 different cities, towns, counties, and states that have filed suit. Recently, Vermont, Delaware, New York City, DC, and Hoboken are some of the lawsuits on the East Coast. We also have a special session really digging into these claims online on March 10th. And if you sign up for a mailing list, you can find out more about that. We specifically want the state of New Jersey via the governor and attorney general to file a lawsuit and support municipal lawsuits. Again, holding the oil industry accountable for their fair share of climate change damages. Why? Because they deceived. And we have a ton of documents that came out in 2014 showing exactly what the industry has known since at least 1963 about their product's relationship to the atmosphere. This is just one little bit of one document from 1968 showing that report that was commissioned by Stanford Research Institute. So there's a lot of details in there, and I'm happy to go through that. Again, we have a special session on the deception that you could sign up for to get the recording. This is an example from 1998 of their deception. This is called the Victory Memo, which was in response to the UN protocol to reduce global gas emissions. So in 1998, this was released as an inner memo to the industry, basically directing the industry to make climate change a non-issue for the public and to frame those of us who believe in reducing gas emissions to be seen as out of touch with reality. Again, I'm going through this really, really fast. But also in 2014, besides all that plentiful documentation, was the science of attribution that came out in the carbon major study by Richard and Heavey. And what this basically does, and again, we have another session on this specification. This is the science of actually tracing fossil fuel emissions back to producers. And it showed us that this can actually, climate change can be traced to 90 specific companies. So what you're seeing in these graphs were produced by the Union of Concerned Scientists. And on the left is the increase of emissions after 1965, which is after the documented evidence showed that they knew what they were doing. And on the right is attributing actual climate impacts like ocean acidification, temperature rise, and sea level rise to different percentages of emissions from certain companies. Why is this so important in New Jersey? You all know the climate impacts here, your climate leaders and environmental leaders. It's extremely concerning in New Jersey, but also we have a mandate for municipalities right now by the state to incorporate their climate vulnerabilities into their master plan and in their land use. So the municipal responsibility is to actually plan for climate now. And the state doesn't have the funds for that. So we say, who's going to pay for it? Here's just some examples of costs to New Jerseyans. It's always out of the taxpayer's pocket. It is never out of the polluter's pocket. So that's exactly what we are trying to bring forward here. We do have cost studies as well on cooling schools and seawalls and those kinds of studies. So I'm just gonna somehow get a link to you guys to sign up for more information like this. These are just some of our educational events online. And there will always be actions that we can share with you. So I thank you for your attention and for this opportunity. And I think actually Doug is going to mention who's next. Thank you for your time.
Lauren, before we move on to the
Yeah.
next group, I have the Honorable Bob Russo here, our Montclair council member. He's wondering if he could help out with this initiative in Montclair. I'm going to type out your email to him. Is that cool?
Please. Yes, I have something that I can give you. I have a thing ready to go to paste, but I don't see a chat anywhere. So I have, my email is payupnjpolluters@gmail.com, and Councilman, we can definitely talk. There's plenty of templates for you to choose from.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
And do you have like a website or something
Yes.
that houses all this? I'll type that out for another question.
That is, again, I think it's probably better to give my email just because so I can direct,
Cool.
you know, the municipal climate plans that are required and all that. I understand. So thanks, Carolyn, for asking that. Again, payupnjpolluters@gmail.com.
At Gmail. Gotta love it. Lauren, whenever you're ready, you could stop sharing your screen.
Oh, right. Thank
It's
you.
all good. It's all good. We're all just excited to be here. Thank you, Lauren. Always a pleasure to hear from you. Next up, we have an organization that I am truly a large fan of. Give it up for City Green. I believe our representative this year is Miss Emily. How are you, Emily?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. I have a slideshow we can share. Just give me one moment.
Take your time, my friend.
All right. Does that look good?
Looks beautiful.
Thank you.
That's a
Hi,
beautiful
everyone.
picture.
My name's Emily Evers. I am the communications coordinator here at City Green. We are a nonprofit urban farming and gardening organization based in Clifton. Our mission is that we envision livable, green urban communities that are socially, economically, and environmentally rejuvenated. And we do all this work to make sure that everyone has access to fresh produce, that youth have volunteer opportunities, leadership opportunities, and employment opportunities, and that all neighborhoods in our communities have safe, welcoming natural respites. To do this, we have a market and CSA program. So starting in June, the City Green markets will be up and running. You can come to the Farm Eco Center here in Clifton or visit us at our Veggie Mobile spots. It's a mobile refrigerator truck that comes to community events and libraries and schools and does kind of like a pop-up farm stand. We also operate our Good Food Bucks program. So SNAP, WIC, and senior FMNP recipients are eligible to double the federal nutrition assistance they receive. We do a ton of youth programming, after school programming. We do in-school sessions, and we also operate a community of dig-in community gardens throughout Passaic County. And all of this is really housed right in Clifton out of our Farm Eco Center. So this is a 5-acre site on Grove Street. It was formerly the Schulteis family farm, and at our Farm Eco Center, we have accessible and inclusive pathways and garden beds. We have educational facilities, we have farm animals for the kids, a greenhouse, outdoor kitchen, and we host a lot of field trips, our farmers markets, family and educational programs, and all sorts of community events and festivals. Our main operation here at the Farm Eco Center is our organic farming production. We have 2 acres of organic vegetable production. So we do no-till regenerative agriculture practices, and we also are working on building a permaculture food forest. So this is a really unique and really exciting way to kind of grow food naturally and holistically with the earth. Last year, we grew 125 vegetable varieties, and we harvested over 14,000 pounds of produce just out of our 2-acre farm. Also at the Farm Eco Center is our learning farm. So this is an educational garden where we host festivals, field trips, youth and family programming, and so much more. We're also open for passive recreation beginning in April. This learning farm is home to our farm animals. So our very famous Luna goose lives here, as well as our chickens, rabbits, and goats. And this really provides a really unique opportunity for the youth in our community to kind of get outside, engage with nature, and learn really where their food comes from. So we are very excited to welcome you all back to the Farm Eco Center this season. We're currently hiring. We're looking for garden educators, good food buck ambassadors, farm and market assistants, and more. So if you have any youth in your network or in your community that are looking to get involved, send them our way. We're also kicking off our volunteer season on April 20th. So our volunteer season runs from April to November. We'll have morning and afternoon sessions available. And we also have corporate and group opportunities available. So if you are interested in that, please email info@citygreen.org, which I will link in the chat. And then we have a ton of exciting workshops and events coming up. So our winter pruning workshop is next Saturday. You'll learn how to prune and take care of all those native plants in your garden. We're also beginning our Saturday family program. So that's once a month. I think it's ages 5 to 12. You can come and spend some time at our learning farm. Storytime in the Garden is beginning in April. That is a 6-week pre-K program. You can register for that at clipsandrec.com. And then our very exciting City Green plant sale will be happening on May 6th and 7th. You can come pick up some locally organically grown seedlings that you can plant in your own garden. And here's how you can get connected with us. We have our Instagram and our Facebook, which is CityGreenNJ, our website, citygreenonline.org, and then feel free to email any questions you have at info@citygreen.org. And I will link all that information in the chat.
Sweet. Thank you, Emily. Unfortunately, our chat is not enabled. So once someone it poses a question in the Q&A, you could, if you want, send that to my email. Or Jose's email, and he'll forward it over to me, and I'll make sure it gets up in the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Tell everyone at City Green I said, what's up? Ring with
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, at our first virtual tabling section this morning, we have David from Montclair Climate Action. Good to see you again, David. The floor is yours. Let us know what's up.
Thank you. Can you see the slide on the screen?
Perfectly.
Perfect. Excellent. Oops, I'm going to go back to start here. So I'm David, with the president of Montclair Climate Action. We are a local group dedicated, it says, to climate action. Our goal is to make Montclair a climate leader by getting individuals to take action, but also the township as a community to take action to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. And also in the long run, we'll need to do some adaptation as well. We all came at this as individuals who had done tried to do what we could as individuals, saving energy or installing solar panels or sort of reducing fuel usage and so on. But we decided also what individual action wasn't enough. We need to take more systemic action. We need to change the system in certain ways that Gare was talking about earlier, which is, we're looking for community action. We created this problem collectively. We're gonna have to solve it collectively, not just through individual action on our own individually. We've done a number of things this year. We actually started, or last year rather, we started by encouraging people to use the opt-up in the energy aggregation program that Montclair is part of, to opt up to 100% renewable electricity. And in fact, if you haven't done it and want to do it, you can still do it. You can go, we have the Sustainable Essex Alliance. We have some information on our website about in the page where we talk about Sustainable Essex Alliance, where you can call the provider and opt up to 10% renewable electricity. It actually costs about like a coffee cup extra per month, cup of coffee per month. So I think that's a pretty good investment in our children's and grandchildren's future. So we've been promoting the opt-up. We've been promoting community solar, which is a great program around the state to expand access to local renewable energy, particularly for low and middle income people and renters, people who might not be able to put in solar panels. We tried working with we worked with the Montclair Environmental Commission about trying to get a composting pilot modeled after something that's being done in Millburn to reduce waste, which of course gets burned at a landfill in Newark, which has environmental consequences there as well, beyond just greenhouse gases. In November, we had a rally in support of the COP26, so cooperating with a variety of local groups, which we want to thank all the people who are involved with that. Ultimately, also in support of trying to get action at the state level from the governor to to stop building fossil fuel plants. And we're also working with local groups about trying to get certain resolutions through the Township Council and supportive efforts. We're working with Quiet Montclair and a group of other groups to see what we can get done locally as well. So we've done a variety of things this year. Going forward, we have a number of projects. This year, we're working on, again, renewable electricity, trying to get not just encourage people to sign up, but we'd love to see the township and the other townships in the Sustainable Essex Alliance use that structure to move to 100% renewable electricity by 2030. We call it the 100 by 30 project. So we're working with groups in a number of neighboring towns to see if we can encourage our governments to move us in that direction. We have a group continuing to work on composting, not only individual action and education, but also, again, seeing if we can get a program model after Milburn in the pilot they've got there with the company Java's Compost that some of you may know of or be cooperating with. And continue again in the meantime to promote action on rooftop community solar. And of course, we're open to, we'd love to sort of continue increasing awareness. And of course, we're always open to other projects that people feel need to be done in the area. So we're going to keep working, do what we can to make Montclair a climate leader and taking the action we need to do to address the climate crisis. Here at the local level, Gare was talking about the importance of local action building. And a phrase I've heard, a movement of movements, and would love to see that happen here in New Jersey and keep the pressure, and particularly not only locally, but also at the state level to take the action we need. So here's some contact information. Our next meeting is actually coming up next Thursday. We'll be on Zoom. You can sign up at our website. There's a contact us page. You can submit your information there, or you can just email us at info@montclairclimateaction.org. We do have some social accounts you can follow us. Would love to have you join us on the 17th and shoot any questions my way. You can email me directly at david@montclairclimateaction.org or just use our general email. So that's an overview of what we do. I hope some of you will get involved with our efforts to do what we can to make Montclair a climate leader. And I'll stop there, Doug.
David, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear from you every year and get some updates. You're doing great work in Montclair. And like we're talking about this morning, the work that you're doing is helping pick up momentum with other communities that are trying to do the same thing. Montclair has really spearheaded that energy aggregation program with the Sustainable Essex Alliance. Good stuff. Very good, productive stuff. Thank you, David. Thank you to all of our first virtual tabling organizations. Very important things that are going on right here in our backyard, in our community, in our locale. So as we get ready for our next speaker's presentation, I just want to update everyone that we still have a very exciting and inspiring program for the rest of the day. We'll be hearing from Jose Agudo from the Catholic Climate Covenant. We'll also be having 2 more virtual table sessions, actually 3 more virtual tabling sessions this afternoon. We'll be hearing from the NJ Bike and Walk organization. They always have very great information to share every year. I think they've been with us since the beginning. We'll be hearing from Melissa Miles in a couple hours from the NJ Environmental Justice Alliance. We'll also be hearing from Montclair's very own Amy Tuninga from Montclair State University at the PSE&G Institute for Sustainability Studies. After our next featured speaker, we'll also be having a short lunch recess, which will include the screening of 2 short videos. So we'll be having lunch and a movie this afternoon. So as mentioned, our next featured speaker is going to be Jose, who is the executive director over at the Catholic Climate Covenant. He leads policy development that helps guide the U.S. Catholic Church's responses to climate change. A key aspect of the Covenant's call is to inspire climate change as a moral and non-partisan obligation. This approach, undertaken by Jose, was at the Friends Committee on National Legislation led in 2015 to the Gibson Resolution, which was the first formal positive statement on climate change by a group of elected Republicans in Congress since 2008. That opened the door for bipartisan caucuses and legislation, which are creating a politically viable foundation for meaningful climate action. Jose is also on the board of the U.S. Climate Action Network on the steering committee of the Green Leadership Trust. Earlier in his career, Agudo worked for the National Congress of American Indians and the EPA's American Indian Environmental Office. Let me find Jose here in our attendees list. There you are, sir. I believe Jose is calling in today from DC. Is that correct? Jose, whenever you're ready.
Hi, Doug. Hey, I'm calling in from Alexandria, Virginia, home of the Piscataway Indians. So blessed to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming, Jose. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, very good. The description was a little outdated, but that's okay. Really blessed, and thank you so much, Jose, also for inviting me to this forum, and the blessing of hearing of all of the wonderful work that all of you are doing on so many levels with such detail and such dedication. Especially excited to see Ted Glick. We did some advocacy back in the day in the DC area. So hey Ted. So I wanted to start with a really broad sketch of the church and then layer it with highlights of what we, the Covenant and U.S. Catholic Church, are doing with regard to care for our creation, climate action, all of the dimensions that many of you are covering, and hopefully offer you some opportunities to get engaged in some of the work that we're doing. First, to say that the Catholic Climate Covenant is a national Catholic organization, and we serve the U.S. Catholic Church in trying to lift up what we would call the charism of care for creation as a requirement of our Catholic faith. And Gare talked about trajectory. And so we are helping guide that trajectory both within the U.S. Catholic Church as well as the global Catholic Church. And I wanted to start with the global church first, because many of you are familiar with Pope Francis's leadership in this arena. So to start, the global Catholic Church is 1.3 billion people across the world. And we are unified by the same Mass and the same readings that are said every day with the celebration of the Eucharist. And so in this way, we are, as the phrase goes, one bread, one body in Christ. Now, obviously, we understand 1.3 billion people. There are a plethora and a diversity of opinions and approaches in the way that we live the gospel. But we're talking today about how we're lifting up care for creation as part of our charism as the global Catholic Church, now led by Pope Francis. With regard to the U.S. Catholic Church, there are 70 million U.S. Catholics under 193 bishops and dioceses, 17,000 parishes approximately 6,000 parochial and Catholic high schools, serving just under 2 million students, 240 plus Catholic colleges and universities. 1 in 6 patients in hospitals are being served by a Catholic health system. Catholic Charities USA is sometimes the largest provider of social services for the poor and vulnerable in a state. And then Catholic Relief Services, one of the major international aid organizations, serves in over 100 countries and tens of millions of people. And we also have in the United States hundreds of religious orders. So I want to give you that snapshot that will relate to how we, the global and the U.S. Catholic Church, are stepping into care for creation and climate action. And so I'm going to do a share screen here. That's okay. Is that right? Okay. Can you see that, Doug? Can you confirm that you can see that?
Looks terrific.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to play from the start here. And if there's any trouble, Doug, you're going to have to call on me because I don't think I can see you.
Yeah, I got you.
If I'm called in any trouble, call me out. Okay, so the church's concern for creation did not start with Pope Francis. It didn't even actually start with Pope John Paul II. It started in the 1970s with Pope Paul VI. But the most prominent early adopter, if you will, is St. Pope John Paul II, who had a great love of nature. And in 1990, in a speech that he gave, the World Day of Peace speech, this is what he said, recognizing our lack of due respect for nature, and then using the phrase that we must have an ecological conversion. to ensure the vitality of our future. Pope Benedict also was known as the Green Pope during his tenure, and then this eventually led, and then also one of the major Catholic organizations in the United States, the most predominant one, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which is that grouping of the 193 bishops that I mentioned, said in 2001 this beautiful phrase with regard to that the earth is the Lord's and all it holds, and that our Creator has given us the gift of creation, and that climate change, our response to climate change should be a sign of our respect for God's creation. This, as many of you know, led in 2015 to Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, Care for Our Common Home. And it is this standing on the shoulders of his predecessors, lifting this charism up as something to be very affirmed across not just our faith, but all faiths. And as Pope Francis said, people of goodwill. And this, he said, is an essential to a life of virtue as a Christian. It is not an optional or secondary aspect of our Christian experience. So this is something that we step into as an article of faith, and that we must do so courageously. All of us, I imagine, in this conference, feel this climate emergency and the need for us to get into right relationship with our earth. So Laudato Si having been issued in May of 2015, in November of 2021, the Vatican launched what is called the Laudato Si Action Platform, which, as you can see through the wording here, is a journey towards full sustainability in the holistic spirit of integral ecology. It is marrying our faith with our practices to be in right relationship with our earth, also out of respect and care for our most vulnerable neighbors and our common future. Overarching, just think 777. It is a 7-year journey by 7 sectors of the Catholic community to fulfill 7 goals. And hearkening back to what I mentioned before about the diversity and the complexity of the Catholic universe, these are the 7 sectors. These are the 7 sectors: families, parishes, colleges, high schools, healthcare, organizations, businesses, and religious orders. And through this 7-year journey and the action platform is the creation of assessment tools in which each of these sectors go through 7 goals of response to the cry of the earth, of the poor, economics, sustainable lifestyles, education, spirituality, and then community resilience and empowerment, which also includes advocacy. We, the Catholic Climate Covenant, are blessed by the Vatican and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to lead the U.S. implementation of the Laudato Si Action Platform. So we are working with the U.S. leaders in these sectors to enliven that within our country. And we are bolstered. I'm going to show you several aspects of this opportunity. We, the Catholic Climate Covenant, have over 400 creation care teams in parishes. Also, schools can do them, as well as religious orders, where you're doing many of the activities that many of you do with regard to sustainability in your local communities. We recently announced some small grant winners where we're providing $1,000 to parishes, schools, community organizations like yours to do activities which lift up any of those 7 goals that we mentioned. We had a wonderful application pool of 230 applicants, many of them, a strong percentage of them, asking for funding to do things like community gardens. And we are really excited to announce that in about a month or so, we're going to have another round of this grant program. And so we welcome many of your U.S. Catholic institutions to apply. I also wanted to note there with this recent round that is on your screen right now, we had grant winners, 2 of them in New Jersey, one was in Montclair, Investor Advocates for Social Justice. to help with their advocacy, their shareholder advocacy campaign, and then also with Straight and Narrow in Paterson, New Jersey, to work with Rutgers University to create and sustain a sustainable urban garden. We also have a youth and young adult mobilization program where we're bringing together Catholic youth and young adults who feel the climate urgency, but want to express their sense and their activities through their Catholic faith. We, the Covenant, also have a Catholic Energies program. For example, what you see on your screen is currently the largest solar array in Washington, D.C. that was placed on the land of the Sisters of the Order of Mother Teresa, and has allowed Catholic Charities USA to be carbon neutral. This is another example, and this can happen across the country. And if you want to talk to Catholic Energies about this, you can have your parish or your school, your Catholic school, provided with solar panels. And Catholic Energies is a one-stop shop that helps Catholic entities the Catholic Energies will do the assessments, will look for the financing, look for the contractors. It's a turnkey operation. So feel free to talk to them if your parish or other Catholic institution is interested. As another example, out of those 7 sectors, there is a Laudato Si University sector. And Gare was talking about this and the power of hospitals and universities to leverage their capital and their influence and their expertise into these communities. And so there is a Laudato Si University Pathways, and we've got over 40 or 50 of these US Catholic universities have already signed up for the Laudato Si Action Platform, and this is their path through the university pathways. And one example of this cross-collaboration, Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington, working with the Spokane elementary schools to provide lesson plans on how to power up LED and how to use solar. So we're really excited about these cross currents that are happening across the church. I put in a couple slides inspired by Louise's presentation earlier this morning with regard to Pollinator Pathways to lift up one of our partners, and that is the St. Kateri Conservation Center. Many of you may know about this organization, and co-founded by Bill Jacobs and Kat Honig, where they are doing much of the work that you're doing with regard to pollination and native seeds and native plants, doing it since 2000. They have a program that is very similar to some other programs you may have seen, but it has a very strong Catholic focus of inviting, again, parishes and schools to enlist in a St. Kateri habitat, doing many of the same things that you're doing, but also, Bill and the other co-founders have made it very clear that they want to bring the Catholic dimension into these activities. For example, the central idea of the habitats is to maintain a religious expression on the land to serve as a gentle reminder of God, of his presence everywhere and in everything, and of his transcendence. And so bringing the spiritual dimension into this work is something that we're really excited to lift up. And many of you may have seen, I saw, and I picked it up because I saw, Bill's a wonderful partner of ours. He was featured in the New York Times back in December with regard to this work. So, feel free to check that out. Okay, so I want to pause for a second and move to a shift. And that relates to the climate crisis that we're all familiar with. And there is an interesting or a very challenging balance that we all have to work with the realities, the climate realities that we're facing, the political realities that we're facing, and to seek hope and perseverance and strength during these times. We're also recognizing not just that climate reality, but how it's also reflecting upon ourselves and especially our children. And you may have seen this, many of you are familiar with the Yale Program for Climate Communication and how they plot the 6 Americas and how America writ large is responding to the threats of climate change. And the number of alarmed people has vastly increased since 2017 and is likely going to increase because, frankly, the climate exacerbated phenomenon that we are suffering from are only going to increase. We also recognize the climate anxiety that especially the younger generations are feeling. And this is a study that was recently published in The Lancet, and it was also featured in a New York Times article, I believe Monday, where there are large percentage. It was a survey of 10,000 youth ages 16 to 24 in 10 countries. And for example, 80% of them think that we, humanity, are not treating the earth properly. And strong majorities of them are very, very concerned about our future. And that these concerns are ones which, frankly, many of us who are older, like myself, we never had to think about. And yet our youth are carrying these burdens as very difficult knowledge that is affecting their ability to continue forward with hope. And so we as a community need to both recognize this reality and provide tangible solutions and tangible hope to help us all envision a thriving future. And as Gare and many of you have said, it starts on the local level. And so let us step forth and do those actions, because action dispels despair. And we would also argue we would evangelize in the Catholic faith and many other faiths that we have to lift up our belief in God, because in God everything is possible, that we must carry forth regardless of the circumstances in order to be strong and to actually enact thriving solutions for ourselves, for our children, and for future generations. And so one of the ways, I'll say on a national level, we, the Covenant, we do advocacy, but I wanted to lift up an advocacy alert from one of our partners, and that goes to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Oh, well, this is an important slide. Let me stop for a second, and this relates to some of the description of my bio in the past. I stepped into this space because I truly believe that faith can and must transcend partisanship. And so we as a Catholic faith do so in this manner, and is expressed by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, that we believe global climate change is not about economic theory or political platforms, nor about partisan advantage or interest group pressures. It's about the future of God's creation and the one human family. And as individuals, as institutions, as a people, we need a change of heart to preserve and protect the planet for our children and for generations yet unborn. And one of the hallmarks of faith traditions is that you first start from within yourself and have that internal transformation, that metanoia that brings you into a great spacious place of love and forgiveness, of loving not just yourself or your family, but also your neighbor and also your enemy, according to the gospel. And it's stepping into this both difficult but necessary aspect of faith in order for all of us to have a change of heart and all of us to be able to work constructively with people who are our adversaries in order to manifest change. And so a recent advocacy opportunity that you're free to consider, anyone is free to consider, comes from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and they issued this a couple of weeks ago. And it relates to the erstwhile Build Back Better bill in support of also of climate provisions, as well as the child tax credit. And that's the link that you'll see, and I can also send it. But the messaging within that is, on the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, Pope Francis called for a culture of care, which places human dignity and the common good at the center. And so the Bishops' Conference encourages Congress to advance climate investment that protects our common home, to support existing emerging technologies and clean energy, resilience investments that protect low-income and minority communities, and incentives to decarbonize the economy so that we can reach the United States can reach the Paris Agreement goals to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. And so we, the Covenant, are going to be lifting this up, and we're also going to be lifting up our own effort to work with many of you to have encounters with your congressional representatives to continue to advance the opportunity for meaningful climate solutions in this Congress. With regard, I wanted to finish with regard to emphasis of how important or the essential nature, I think, of the faith traditions as partners with the rest of the entire climate community. We are living, as we all know, in a very difficult time where the very foundations of our democracy are threatened, and we all are laden with the knowledge of the climate community. Change happens when there's love. Martin Luther King was an absolutely brilliant apostle for this message, and we must step into the darkness and drive it out only with light. And we must step into the hate only with love. And that love is, for many of us, and for me, it comes from God, comes from the triune God. And what Martin Luther King was also reflected in St. Francis's peace prayer. And one of the phrases I just wanted to focus on right now is, where there is despair, let us sow hope. And where there is darkness, let us sow light. So this is how we hope to carry forth in this struggle and this fellowship with all of you, so that we can render a brighter future for all of us and for all yet to be born. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose, for this very informative session on what you guys have been working on. This is extremely important work. And like we've been learning this morning, the more people who get involved, the better. You know, the change is coming, the change is spreading. We have some time for some Q&A with you, Jose. I see one question here in the Q&A. Friends, if you have any questions for Mr. Agudo, now's the time. You could type it in the Q&A, or if you'd like to get your face up on the screen, we can do that also. That actually wasn't a question. That was someone complimenting you on a wonderful presentation, because it was. Again, any questions for Mr. Jose? Not to be confused with the NEEC's Jose, but it is a charming name.
Thank you, Jose, for your wonderful presentation. I want to let you know that we have two projects with the Catholic Church. One is Mother Teresa of Calcutta Community Garden, which I had the opportunity to meet her in person and talk to her many years ago. Same thing with John Paul II. And we also have in Passaic another special project which we have been working with the project for now almost 8 years. And this community garden is dedicated entirely to women from Mexico and South America. And we are teaching them not only how to grow their own food, but also became integrated into the American society, and teaching them English and teaching them, you know, the civil rights that they have as immigrants. It has been one of the most beautiful and inspiring projects that we have been able to lead in the past year. So we are very happy to see the Catholic Church embracing climate change and social environmental justice. And it's really important to spread the word, because the Catholic Church, also many other religions, are very influential at national level. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you for those inspiring examples. Yeah, that's great.
I have someone here, our friend Mary. She's wondering what, if anything, your organization is doing to try and get young people involved.
Oh, great question. We have a youth and young adult mobilization program, actually called a young adult mobilization program that Anna Robertson is leading. She's just a wonderful person. And so what they are doing is creating a curriculum. She and a cohort of about, I would say, 60 Catholic young adults have stepped into this and working in community to provide curriculum and then work in fellowship for designing programming that can be adopted by young adults in community with regard to spirituality, all the way up to advocacy. So that's what we're doing specifically. Yeah.
Where is the home base of your organization?
We're located in Washington, D.C., across from Catholic University. And so, yeah, we work, with our other national partners, most of whom are based in D.C. as well.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on with our program? Give people just a minute. So we got a question from the Honorable Robert Russo. Hello, Councilman. And he's explaining that his uncle was a very progressive Catholic priest. And he wants his church to be more liberal on economic and other issues in the image of St. Francis and now Pope Francis. How do you have any suggestions for how someone like Mr. Russo might be able to get his congregation on board with things that you guys are purporting?
Great question. Thank you. So we have a creation care team program, as I mentioned, over 400 creation care teams and a curriculum and a way that you can approach your pastor on how to have him support adoption of programs, many of the programs that have been highlighted here. It is frankly, again, Gare's, recommendation that you go local, bring other parishioners together on a call to ask for him to support this kind of programming. In our experience, and I agree with you, in our experience, some of the pastors have not embraced this call, and we have some frustrated constituents. But persistence is the way to move forward, and we do have structures, and you can always give us a call on how we can help accompany you through this journey. And we also have some tremendous creation care team leaders in other parishes who can give you some very strong expertise and lived experience on how to work through those obstacles.
Thank you for that. What's the best way for people to contact you?
Jose at CatholicClimateCovenant.org. Yeah.
Jose at CatholicClimateCovenant.org. Perfect. Being that there's no further questions right now, we're going to let you go, Jose. Thank you so much for sharing your mission and project and progressions with us. Again, very important work, and we're honored to have you join us this morning.
Blessed to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Our next section of the program is going to be another tabling event. So up to the virtual podium, I am now summoning the NJ Native Plant Society and the Montclair Environmental Commission. Let me find them. If you are in the attendee box, please raise your hand if it's your time so I can find you a little faster. Friends, I want to let everyone know that we have a packed attendee list this morning, which is very good. I'm happy to see that there's a bunch of people queuing in. Give me 1 minute. Here's a hand that's up. Miss Deborah Ellis. Miss Deborah Ellis from the New Jersey Native Plant Society, making her way up to the podium. Figuratively speaking, of course. And then I think our next person is going to be, our next group is going to be the Montclair Environmental Commission. The representative from the Environmental Commission, if you can, please raise your hand and I will bring you in. And Deborah Ellis, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen, you can unmute yourself, and let us know what's been going on. Feel free to unmute, Deborah. Give her just a minute, everybody.
Okay, I am good to go.
There she is. What's up, Deborah? How you doing this morning?
Good. And did you want me to share my screen?
Yes, you are welcome to do that.
Okay, that's great.
While Deborah's getting that up, once again, Montclair Environmental Commission, the representative can please raise their hand so I can find you. We'll bring you in. And yeah, Deborah, whenever you're ready, you can start sharing your screen.
Okay. Do you see it?
Into the Society of Plants, please.
Okay.
Yes, you're good.
Good. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Deb Ellis, and I am the leader of the Essex chapter of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey, along with 9 other wonderful people who are on our steering committee. So the Native Plant Society of New Jersey, you might ask, what are we? We are a group whose primary focus is to educate people about native plants. If you've been watching all day, you heard Louise Washer this morning from the Pollinator Pathway talk about native plants, but maybe some of you have joined in. So you might be wondering, what is a native plant? Well, a native plant is a plant that was here before we were, before the colonists came, not before the Native Americans, before the colonists came. And so it has co-evolved with our butterflies, our birds, our bees. And they live with our native plant. Our butterfly, bees, and birds live with our native plants and need our native plants. So planting native plants is a good idea for 3 reasons. First, and most importantly for many of us, is you can help promote biodiversity by planting the native plants that then feed the butterflies and the birds and the bees. Secondly, they are beautiful. You can see from this picture here of this beautiful monarch on the New England aster in the fall that if you plant the native plants, your garden will be even more beautiful than it is now because you will have all this life in it. You encourage the life to come. And then thirdly, it's easier for you because native plants are adapted to our climate. They don't need to be watered, for example. Except maybe the first season. After that, they will do fine with little care because they don't need us to care for them. So planting native plants fits into everything we've been talking about, specifically the last speaker in terms of talking about tending the earth. And he said that a lot of the grants they were doing were for community gardens. And I just want to say you can also do this in your own garden, your own yard, and in community gardens. Okay, so the Essex chapter is the chapter for Essex County here in northern New Jersey, where Montclair, New Jersey, and 20 other towns where this conference is based. And I'm going to tell you about 3 things that we're doing this year if you want to learn more. First, I've listed the online education. The state organization does a lot of online education, and I've listed them. In the winter, we do 3 webinars. In the winter, we do a webinar basically every month. We take a break in the summer so people can get outside and see the native plants. But I've listed some of them, and most notably, I want to point out that we have our conference, which is free, on Saturday, March 5th, and will feature Doug Tallamy, who spoke at this Northeast Earth Coalition conference, I think last year or the year before. But he's going to be speaking, and he will be the keynote speaker in the morning. So you can go to the NPSNJ website in order to sign up for that conference right now. And then also particular interest, I think, is the native plants for the small yard. If you are just getting into native plant growing, or if you have an urban yard, that webinar in April, I think actually I mistyped that. I think it's April 27th. Instead of April 20th, I think will be very, very helpful to you. It is April 27th. I apologize for that. Okay, I'm going to go to my next slide. So our first category of things we do is online education. And another thing about I want to emphasize is that we really, especially our chapter, really tries to reach out to people who maybe have never gardened. So don't think you have to be an expert gardener. You can start by planting one plant, maybe milkweed. The milkweeds are the plants that the monarchs lay their eggs on, and they need milkweed to survive. So I wanted to highlight a wonderful webinar that another steering committee of ours member did last year. And it was called Native Gardening for Beginners. And I have the link here. It's kind of long, but it's on the Native Plant website. So you could go to the Native Plant website of New Jersey and look under webinars and look for the Native Gardening for Beginners. If you're just starting out, this is a great tool for you because Dennis did a fantastic job of looking really for 10 plants to start with. For all seasons. And Louise this morning emphasized that too, how it's really important to have plants blooming at every season so that we can feed our animals, the butterflies and birds at all seasons of the year. Okay, so the second category of things we do is outdoor events. We all feel that there's so many webinars and the webinars are great, but it's great to get out and see the plants and touch them and see how they grow. So we try to do different things at different times of the year. We're doing an end of winter walk. It's the day before spring starts. And that will be in Brookdale Park in Montclair. All of these, by the way, are free and open to everyone. And they will be on our Facebook page, our Instagram, as well as the state website. Our chapter does not have its own website. And then we'll have a spring wildflower walk in a Morris County park where there is amazing wildflowers. And these right here, by the way, are wild geraniums that bloom in the spring, native spring flowers. And then we'll do a summer garden tour at a private home in South Orange. So you can see that we're trying to do things at different seasons of the year. One thing I want to say is that I think especially for spring, people think of spring as being tulips and irises and daffodils. And those are not from our country. They are from Asia and Europe, and our insects cannot use them. So it's really nice to think about planting some spring flowers like columbine or golden Alexander, or those beautiful native geraniums. And I just wanted to urge you to especially think about that. Okay, and then the last category of things we do is to help people find native plants, because it is sometimes hard if you're going into a garden center. They may not have native plants, especially the big box stores. And so, and especially in our area, it's not true everywhere, but in northern New Jersey, it's still a challenge. So here are some ways that we're going to help people purchase the native plants. And I also want to remind you that City Green in Clifton mentioned that they're having a plant sale on May 6th and 7th, and I bet you they're going to feature native plants because they grow them there and they're really well priced. I've been to their sale before. This, by the way, I want to tell you is a bush called winterberry holly. It's a native bush that has all these red berries, and this is from I have a very small property. This is from my yard, and the robins just ate all of them. 2 weeks ago when it snowed, the robins were having a Thanksgiving day, I think, in my berry bushes. So anyway, here are 3 plant sales that we're involved with this year. The first one is the Great Swamp Watershed Association plant sale, which is a very large plant sale that is covering much of northern western New Jersey. It's going to be online April 1st to the 22nd. And there is going to be a kickoff webinar about it through the Great Swamp on April 1st. If you want more information, you can go to thegreatswamp.org. Our organization is participating in it, and there will be pickup locations in our county, one in South Orange Park and one in Montclair at my home. So the way it works is you order online and then you can select a pickup location near where you live. And so there's many others too. So even if you don't live in Essex County, but you live in northern New Jersey, I urge you to think about that. They have great kits that they're selling to get for beginner gardeners. So it's really part of our outreach to get more people. And then we have also, we're bringing Toadshade Nursery to the Glen Ridge Eco Fair on Saturday, May 21st, where we'll also be tabling. And then we're going to do another event with Tochi Nursery in September, because we want to always tell people you can buy in the fall. And that will also feature seed starting demonstrations on that event. So here's my ending. I really believe that we can.
I'm sorry to cut you off. You don't need to rush at all. The group that was coming after you is just experiencing some technical difficulties. So if you have anything else, any other updates that you'd like to share with us, please don't feel rushed.
Okay, thank you, because I saw your face and then I felt more rushed. Okay.
Quite the opposite, actually. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
okay, so I will speak a little more slowly. The other category of things we do is that we have some members meetings that are advertised to our members only, so that they can be, so that we can build a community of people that are more interested. So that all the events I mentioned are open to everyone, but we also encourage you, if you're interested, that you can go to our website and join. And this is our email, but our website again would be the npsnj.org. It's only $20 a year to join. And if you do decide to join, then you can indicate the chapters that you would like to get emails from. And we're all pretty good about not sending too many emails. We send emails about our events. So for example, if you live in Essex, you'd want to indicate that you'd like to join the Essex chapter. And there's chapters in not every county, but in many counties in New Jersey. There's one in Hunterdon, there's a new one in Hudson, there's one in Bergen-Passaic. So I would urge you to think about joining if you think that this is something you would like to be more involved with. We do member Zoom meetings and also member in-person meetings in the summer, because we know that people like to be together. We're also very conscious of the health situation we're in, so we're really emphasizing outdoor activities. So I do want to end by saying that I would like anyone who has not planted a native plant to consider doing one this year. These are the hands of the grandchildren of one of my steering committee members, Dina Corbin, and they're holding milkweed seeds. So I like to think about, I learned about wildflowers from my parents 50 or more years ago, and then Dina teaches her grandchildren. So it's also a way to connect the generations and build the world we want to build. I really believe that together we can heal Mother Earth one garden at a time. And I will be glad to take questions.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you.
Doug, can I pause for 1 second? I went on before my time and I have something in the oven and I need to turn off the oven, or all my work has been on. I'll be run and I'll be back.
Do that real quick. Do that real quick. Deborah is a multitasker, which is one of many traits of productive people. So we have a bunch of organizations that will be tabling with us this afternoon. Next up was the Montclair Environmental Commission. Again, if there is a representative from the Environmental Commission here, please raise your hand. We'll bring you in, promote you to a panelist.
Okay, I am back.
Hey.
I have homemade granola bars for my trip to Okefenokee Swamp next week.
Nice, perfect. I have a note from a friend, another Deborah here, that Farmer John is hosting a native plant sale at Morgan's Farm in Cedar Grove this spring. You can find details of that and dates on Facebook, Morgan's Farm, and the Morgan's Farm website. They will be offering monarch kits and other pollinator kits as well. Suzanne Nutt is asking for your email and phone number one more time.
Okay, I'm not going to give out my phone, but the email is right here on this slide that I'm still sharing, so you have that.
Perfect.
And then the website is just the npsnj.org.
Okay.
So that's the website. There's the email that will go to me. And I wanted to say the Morgan's Farm sale, that I'm glad she mentioned it. I can tell you the dates. It's April 22nd, which is Earth Day, April 23rd, and April 24th.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Alex Ortiz is asking if you can repeat some details about the webinar for beginners.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alice. Alex, I will, I can go back to that slide actually, if I can.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'm not seeming to be able to though. Here it is. So the Native Gardening for Beginners is a webinar we did a year ago. So it's on a recording. It's a recording that is on the Native Plant website that Alex, I guess you just went to register for the upcoming one. And if you go to the webinar page there, you will find it will have a description of Dennis Hillerud's Native Gardening for Beginners and a link. And this is the link, which is kind of long. I don't know if you can put that in the chat. Probably you can't. I don't think I can even, but anyway, I hope that was helpful, that you could go there and find it.
Sweet. Thank you, Deborah. Also, we have some people inquiring if you could, off the top of your head, rattle off some names of beginner plants.
I will. And I want to say that will be the other thing I mentioned was the Great Swamp Plant Sale is having a webinar on Friday, April 1st at noon. And they're going to be talking about the plants they have there. And a lot of those are beginner plants too. So Friday, April 1st at noon, the Great Swamp Watershed Association. So some beginner native plants are milkweeds, because milkweeds are the only plant that the monarchs can lay their eggs on, because they've co-evolved so that the monarchs can surmount the milkweed's defense. You might notice if you break off a leaf of a milkweed, it's very sappy and it gums up the mouth parts of other insects. But monarchs have learned how to deal with that. And in turn, they only lay their eggs on the milkweed. So here's my #1 starting plant, a swamp milkweed. It's easy to grow, and it can be grown in dry soil, contrary to its name, or in very wet soil. And it's been grown in sun or shade. So wherever you are, wherever you live, everyone can grow swamp milkweed, and you will then see butterflies. Another really wonderful plant to grow is purple coneflower. That also blooms in the summer, like swamp milkweed. And then I'm gonna go to the fall. 2 great fall plants are goldenrod, and there's many kinds of goldenrod. Some people think goldenrod makes you sneeze, but it doesn't. That's ragweed. Goldenrod and New England asters or New York asters, some kind of aster together. They're yellow and purple, and the monarchs love them, and it's a beautiful fall display. So I'm going to now go to the spring, and in the spring, I think I urge people to grow this beautiful red plant called columbine, as well as a yellow plant called golden alexander. So those are 6 plants: columbine and golden alexander for the spring, purple coneflower and swamp milkweed for the summer, and goldenrod and asters for the fall. And if you can only do one, try swamp milkweed. These are the milkweed seeds. And all of these will be available at all of these sales, pretty much.
So I have someone else inquiring if you have some advice for the best way to grow swamp milkweed seeds now.
Okay. I think that I am not an expert on seed growing, because my way of growing them is just let them scatter. But for most native plant seeds, you want to make sure that they had a period of cold, like they would have in the world, like they would be outside, right? So you have to put them in the refrigerator if you've collected them and didn't have them in the refrigerator. But if they've been outside, or if you bought them, they will have been in that period of what we call cold stratification. And then you can just plant them when the weather warms up. I would say like in April. And one thing is important is to not plant them too deeply, because most native plants grow, their seeds grow when they fall off the plants. And so they don't want to be planted 1 inch deep. They want to be planted just a tiny little bit. Sometimes I say it's best to just put the plants, scatter the seeds on the ground, and then scatter some soil on top of it and maybe stamp it down. That would work, especially with these really little seeds. But I also want to say a lot of times with native plants, buying one plant is going to be enough, because they will reproduce and you'll get more. So you don't always have to start from seed, but if you want to, you can.
Cool. Good stuff. Very important stuff too, that be. Are there any other questions for our friend, Miss Ellis? Pam says, thank you, Deb.
You're welcome. And then the other thing I want to say is that, Northeast Earth Coalition has done a lot of native gardens, which you live in or near Montclair, you should come see. So the Crane Park Demonstration Garden is a great way to see native plants at any time of the year. It's in downtown Montclair, and it's really a nice way to see the urban, how the plants survive in an urban environment without being watered or anything. And then there's also, they've started a wonderful garden in Brookdale Park as well. And it's next to another one, a monarch pollinator garden, which we're going to do our winter walk at. So they, those are some nice areas to look for, to see native plants at any time that if people are interested in how they look. So I thank you for this opportunity. I thank you, Doug, and the Northeast Earth Coalition and everyone who's watching. And I really do believe that together we can heal Mother Earth one garden at a time.
Absolutely.